can one discuss a more topical issue on election day, Hungarian, but also an Englishman.
Well, thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to see my old friend Andrei Feritz here. And indeed, it's a very interesting topic that I'm sort of going to address. And I should warn you that I'll almost certainly not say what you expect me to say. But as I warned Sarah over dinner, I'm going to start with a little bit of methodology. You may know this, that whenever the French start anything, they start with tout d'abord un peu de philosophie. Well, I'm not going to give you philosophy, but I'm going to raise some very interesting, at least to my mind, extremely interesting methodological issues. And the first of these is actually to question, if you like, to interrogate the use of this word populism. Because in my view, and this is partly to do with my political experience in the European Parliament, 6.5 years, but also I think when I was a British academic, there are some words which are so heavily charged with emotion, so strongly veiled, that they actually make further thought difficult, if not actually impossible. I call them killer words because they have this propensity to stop further thought dead. It's a metaphor, let me add. You can argue about how legitimate it is to use metaphors, live by metaphors as a matter of fact. So the significance of this is that if this word is used against you, any of these words, and I'll give you a little list of them in a moment, you're basically put in at one down position. If somebody calls you a populist, the burden of proof is on you to prove your innocence. That's the power of these words. And let me add that all but overwhelmingly these words tend to be used by the left, and they're heavily ideological, obviously. That's what politics is about. It's to create situations where your own ideology gains traction. Now, populism is clearly one of these words, as is racism, fascism, extremism. I've increasingly come to the conclusion, so is the word denier, Holocaust denier. If you're accused of Holocaust denial, then you really are beyond the pale. Note that increasingly I'm seeing the use of the word climate change denial. And no doubt it will be extended to other areas. I don't yet know which, and I don't want to start giving bad examples. Xenophobia, nationalism, patriarchy, stereotyping. Now, these are all words which effectively kill further possibility of thinking because they construct a kind of predetermined model, cognitive model in your mind. You don't want to be associated with these things. When did you last encounter somebody who said, "I'm proud to be a nationalist"? It's not so outrageous, but in the 19th century, nationalism was an emancipatory discourse. It isn't anymore. We now regard nationalism as something highly dubious. We don't do it. Others may do it, but us, no. We're okay. And what this all suggests to me is that if your objective is to think clearly about politics, which means to me how power is deployed, how it's legitimated, how people respond to that, how individual behaviour and collective behaviour encounter one another, what happens to political power in such situations. If that is your objective, to understand the world, because I think that's a central part of the world, I'm not trying to reduce everything to politics, then don't use these words, or at any rate, deconstruct them. Deconstruct them in your own mind. Make sure that you actually understand what is the motive of the individual who's using this word. I see increasing number of articles saying the rise of fascism, the rise of populism, almost impossible to define. What's a populist? I'll come on to this in a second, because I'll try and offer you a definition of my own. But before I do, there are a couple of other methodological points. There is again a propensity to assume that somebody's identity explains everything that they say. Identity politics, in effect, is very much about this. There will certainly be some people who will say, "Oh, that György Schöpflin, he's only saying that because he's a man." Or he's only saying that because he's old, he can't identify with the young. Or he's only saying that because he's Hungarian. They don't probe any further, that perhaps what I'm saying may be being said for some totally different reason, perhaps because I've had a good dinner and I feel at peace with the world. In other words, what I'm getting at is that human motivations are infinitely complex and always mixed. So, just because someone you disapprove of says something, that doesn't automatically mean that they're wrong. They may be wrong, but you should look at the text. You should examine the text rather than the people. Try to separate out the text from the individual. This is what postmodernity is about, or at least one of the things that postmodernity says. If you rely too much on identity as an explanation, that leads you into an intellectual cul-de-sac, because you then basically find yourself, at least very easily, with a single factor explanation. Now that's reductionism. And if you get into the area of reductionism, you have a wonderfully simple picture of the world, but it's not actually correct. And if you take the great ideologies, which tend to be single factor explanations, what tends to happen is that once the ideology is translated into practice, it becomes coercive, because actually the facts don't fit the ideology. It seems to me there is no ideology which actually corresponds to the sociological data it's meant to explain. For that you have to go to sociology, or political science, or anthropology, or any of the multiple disciplines which actually do tell you something about, I hesitate to use this word, reality. One of the great dangers in reading human motivations is to operate from a fixed epistemology. The belief that actually there is a single set of, a one-size-fits-all set of explanations, which explains each and every phenomenon that you encounter. Classical Marxism was very much like this. It's a closed system of thought. And if the facts rebel, as they frequently did, then you're put in gulag. That'll teach you facts. Put the facts into gulag. That eliminates the problem for not a generation until the facts rebel. Finally, in this brief list of methodological problems, and this is in some ways the most difficult one, be aware of your own contingency. Don't assume that you or me or anybody else knows what they think they know, and crucially that what I say is an objective scientific fact isn't necessarily so, because every scientific fact actually has to be seen in its context. What I'm arguing here is for context dependency. Before you actually take something as a datum, you've got to put it in the context in which it lives. Otherwise it explains nothing, but if you act on it, and of course politicians do tend to do this, then you find yourself in trouble, because again you will take a decision that produces unintended consequences. Unintended consequences are the very devil. They get in the way. So people make these wonderful plans, but they don't reckon with the way in which, let's say, the target of your decision will respond to that. So you get unintended consequences. So basically, in a sense, what I'm doing is questioning the entire assumption set of Enlightenment rationality. I do believe that it is one of the ways in which we understand the world, but it is only one of the ways. And also I'm questioning linearity. I actually think there's quite a good argument to be made for cyclicality, but we can leave that to one side. Basically, human beings were always liable to make errors, and we prefer not to notice these errors. It's very tiresome if you're confronted with the mistakes that you've made. Let me move on and talk to you a little bit about populism, which is basically the reason I'm supposed to be here. The rise of populism in the old and the new Europe. Well, let me interrogate that. Old Europe? New Europe? Where are all these places? Or are you all devotees of Donald Rumsfeld, who invented this set of categories?